As the day after Independence Day and the campaigns are in full gear, it is not a busy news cycle, but you get some real interesting clues today as to where the campaigns are going to double down between now and November. And we're going to sit down for a strategy session this evening with whose messaging is working better and who needs to maybe have a new refocus here in the dog days of summer. And let's bring in, to start off, Andrew Whitman, our senior political reporter here, who's going to really break down for us what each guy's doing, and they're already getting heat here from some of their so-called closest friends.
That they are, Rich, and as we broadcast tonight, we're just 124 days away from the election. The two candidates vying for a seat in the Oval Office, a little more than 2.5 points apart, with President Obama in the lead. The two campaigns kicking into a different gear here, each with their own message. As the president began his two-day bus tour across northern Ohio and western Pennsylvania today, his emphasis was on manufacturing. During a stop in the manufacturing-rich Maumee, Ohio, he took the opportunity to highlight his administration's latest actions against China's trade policy, a policy that he calls unfair.
Just this morning, my administration took a new action to hold China accountable for unfair trade practices that harm American automakers. And let me tell you something, Americans aren't afraid to compete. We believe in competition.
Yes, we do.
I believe in trade. And I know this, Americans and American workers build better products than anybody else. So as long as we're competing on a fair playing field instead of an unfair playing field, we'll do just fine.
That message from the president also being mimicked in a new ad from the Obama campaign.
Outsourcing versus insourcing.
That ad paints Mitt Romney and Bain Capital as outsourcers. Meanwhile, Romney's got a bit of a message of his own, but a bit of a message problem because it's a little muddled. In the foggy aftermath of the Supreme Court ruling on Obamacare, Romney's senior advisor, Eric Fernstrom of Etch-a-Sketch fame, you'll recall, contradicted the GOP line and agreed with the White House, saying that the individual mandate is not a tax.
The governor believes that what we put in place in Massachusetts was a penalty, and he disagrees with the court's ruling that the mandate was a tax.
And then only days later, Mitt Romney said that the individual mandate is, in fact, a tax.
Well, the Supreme Court has the final word, and their final word is that Obamacare is a tax. So it's a tax.
Now, that got under the skin of the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. They issued a scathing editorial jumping on Romney for taking the bait properly. Quote, "This latest mistake is of a piece with the campaign's insular staff and strategy that are slowly squandering an historic opportunity." The Romney campaign thinks it can play it safe and coast to the White House by saying the economy stinks and it's Mr. Obama's fault. We're on its email list, and the main daily message from the campaign is that Obama isn't working. Thanks, guys, but Americans already know that. What they want to hear from the challenger is some understanding of why the president's policies aren't working and how Mr. Romney's policies will do better. Meanwhile, the editorial continues. The Obama campaign is assailing Mr. Romney as an out-of-touch rich man, and the rich man obliged by vacationing this week at his lakeside home with a jet ski cameo. Now, that editorial from a Rupert Murdoch-owned paper comes only days after Murdoch himself took to Twitter to blast the Romney campaign, saying, quote, "Met Romney last week. Tough Obama Chicago pros will be hard to beat unless he drops old friends from team and hires some real pros. Doubtful." Rich?
Ouch. All right, let's bring in our panel on this. Tom Doherty, political strategist and former advisor to Republican Governor George Pataki, and Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. And we already met Andrew. Hey, Tom, you've worked on campaigns here, a lot of them successful. You've also had some challenging ones. When the outside, and not Democrats here, but fellow Republicans, and it's not just Murdoch and the Wall Street Journal saying, hey, these guys aren't ready for prime time, and you got Romney, who doesn't seem to either be able to stay on message or come up with a coherent one. Is that usually the time where people start looking around the room and saying maybe we need a change, or do they just close ranks here and say they don't know what we know?
Well, there's certainly not going to be any change. I think that.
Why not, though?
Well, what change would you think? That we're going to have a new Republican nominee?
No, but I mean, in terms of the handlers, Fernstrom hasn't exactly acquitted himself too well here the last few weeks.
Listen, I think that a lot of people a year ago, or even as much as 6 months ago, were talking about that Romney's in a lot of trouble. He's not going to be the nominee. He put those people to the side. Andrew said a lot of different things in his report, and there's a number of things to respond to. First of all, I think that the report should have said that Obama's off to Ohio to talk about manufacturing, And it's the first time in 3 years that manufacturing is now down in this country. That should have been a little addendum to the report. I think that
Take notes, Andrew.
take notes, Andrew. And then on the 4th of July, the Republican nominee spent a nice weekend with his family at his summer home. Shocking. Wait,
Tom, you're jumping to him. I got to tell you, this is the Wall Street Journal here. Hardly some liberal rag here.
Listen, it doesn't matter. I mean, listen, the bottom line is that we are 124 days from an election, from a man who 3.5 years ago was anointed the king of the world, and in all estimates is in a dead heat with the terrible, worst person ever, Mitt Romney. The bottom line is this in this election. If Mitt Romney, and remember this, let me give you another fact, is that in 1980, Ronald Reagan was in a dead heat 10 days out from a presidential election.
Mitt Romney to Ronald Reagan?
Wait a second. No, I'll tell you what the factual side of it is. 10 days out was in a dead heat with Jimmy Carter. We know how that election turned out. The bottom line is this, is that Barack Obama cannot get anywhere near 50% in this election right now. And I am telling you this, if during the next 124 days, if Romney does two things, has any semblance of connection with voters across this country where they go, you know what, he's a pretty decent guy, and couples that with a series of good debates, because I think that's what it's going to come down to, this has the potential of being a blowout election for Mitt Romney.
Okay, wait. He's been running for 5 years and he hasn't connected with the American people.
But here's my problem. You just made the point that this is, as the Wall Street Journal said, a golden opportunity for the grand old party.
Right.
And all people have gotten to know out there, like you said, no connection to the candidate, because what have they learned? That the guy's got a car elevator in a house out there in California, and he's jet skiing in one of his many homes, and he pays 14%, and his guy can't agree if they got an etiquette campaign or it's not a tax, and they'll agree with the White House on it. My point is, they seem to be doing their best to screw this thing up. So why wouldn't they look around and say, sorry, moving day boys, that's our West Wing fame, remember? And we're going to bring in another group of folks here.
Because I believe that there's nothing to be said that couldn't happen, okay? But I think that we forget that just 3 months previous, he was going through a very bruising battle in a Republican primary battle. I think that going forward, he needs to learn a couple of lessons. You can't have your communications guy saying it's not a tax, and 48 hours later you're saying it is a tax. The bottom line is the Supreme Court of the United States just said it's a tax, and what they should be focusing on is that we were sold a wrong bag of goods. The Obama, Reid, Pelosi group.
Your gut says Fernstrom's going to last through the election?
Who?
Fernstrom, the guy, his chief advisor here.
My gut says is that to some level, I think that loyalty matters a little bit, but certainly I think now this is 2 little strikes against a guy that turned out to be, a little bit, they're big strikes. And I'm never opposed to bringing in really smart people into political campaigns, and as Andrew will tell you, there's certainly enough money out there to go hire some new people.
Exactly. We're going to be talking about that. Dom, you've seen how this thing plays out, whether they quietly change the pecking order, who calls the shots here, but it's not just the 2 that Andrew mentioned. You got Bill Kristol, you got a ton of Republican folks saying, what are you doing? You got blood in the water here when it comes to the president. You got opportunities that we never thought we'd have a few years ago. And we're talking about this, and this is the imaging you're doing. What are you folks thinking? You think there's a shakeup or no?
No. I think that that right now what we're talking about is a a glass half empty scenario, as opposed to looking at it as half full. These are the same people, as Tom mentioned, that, we were told that Mitt Romney was the worst candidate ever, and they won the Republican primary. Are you in shock right now?
I am.
What I'm saying?
Yes, I am.
And they won the Republican primary. So you got to give these guys some credit.